As we've discussed in this submodule, we're talking all about the financial sustainability. And when we were creating the slides for this presentation, in the back of my mind was that sustainability question that all funders ask, like, what would you do if funding stopped happening? Are you financially sustainable? And it's hard for me not to be a little cynical where, we're giving away resources for free. We're not a business operation here, and we're
Mm-hmm.
relying on some public funds, whether it's from a private foundation, whether from government sources to make this happen. But when I put my snarkiness aside, I do think about how do I quantify that? And I think it really comes down to what we'll be talking about here is that breakdown of where your sources of revenue come from, whether it's grants, donations, earned revenue from social enterprises. And I think when you have your handle on that, it really gets to that question of what do you do if you do lose a major funder, if you do get a 25% cut in the revenues coming into your agency. So again, no one size fits all, but Asia, what have you seen in some of the organizations you've worked with and how they tackle this question and just their awareness on the revenue side of the equation?
I think I've been privileged enough to work majority with organizations where funding is always a problem, just in terms of no other sources but grants,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because a lot of the opportunity challenged communities that I gravitate to helping with the work, even the environment in and of itself, it is hard to find the quality type of funding or the quality funding sources for sustainability. The dollars are there to get the program done right there in that time and to
Mm-hmm.
service the community, but is there a long-term impact? And so in that journey of working with those types of organizations in those particular geographic locations, was some best practices that I've seen be really worthwhile is that operational component, meaning the branding of your nonprofit. What are you known for? And is there room in that revenue mix to be able to make money from that?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not the capitalistic approach in terms of making money for the sake of making it, but making the money in the with the understanding of having a contingency in place in the event funding goes away. And outside of the operational component and what you're known for, again, products in terms of your audience and also expanding the audience. I think oftentimes nonprofits get very fixated on providing a solution to the need that you're solving, but each community that folks are a part of, no one community is a monolith
Yeah.
either in terms of the need that's there. So when we talk about food insecurity, food deserts, although there's sections of the area, your service area that has that, there are other sections that are just as affluent. And what I've seen in my line of work is nonprofits being able to leverage those other affluential areas, not just from a philanthropic standpoint, but an educational standpoint, so that there's not two parts of an area. And because we're talking so much with folks, city of Newark, Camden, New Brunswick, etc., we can relate to that in New Jersey. You can be in one specific municipality, one particular city, and there's two versions of that city in one. I always think of it, Georgia and Atlanta, about
Yeah.
that. You hear that a lot. There's two Atlantas. But it's not about being divisive. And like you said, and putting starkiness aside, because I think we all share that sometimes in talking about the revenue mix, but it's more so about, again, the unifying component in terms of investing into different areas of your community, because it's still one community, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like tapping into all aspects of a community, and almost like this pay what you can model, but in terms of like bringing in revenues, where whether it's a social enterprise, whether it's targeted fundraising, thinking about how you balance that out, not just hitting like institutions, grant funders, but also people in your community, because people, NIMBYism aside,
Yep.
in their community probably see the value in having folks fed that, have a roof over their heads and, have a little bit more of a stable life that benefits everyone in the community.
For
And
sure. And for
I,
those not familiar with NIMBY, because some folks
yeah,
aren't aware, not in my backyard syndrome, meaning, right? Like if it's not your issue that you're dealing with, it's none of my concern. That's what NIMBYism
yeah,
is that he's
thank you
referring
for the
to.
clarification on that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, I think a lot of what funders get to with this question is, what do those donations look like? What are you going to do to be creative with fundraising, whether it's events or is there a way to, connect a social enterprise to your workforce training program? And these are ways that you can develop those aspects of your operations. And I think too, in the post-COVID environment, I think there was a lot of, unshackling of the way fundraising would happen, where folks would move away from always having the big gala to maybe having some virtual fundraising events, Thinking about maybe mailing out some goods, looking for donations that way. So you can be creative on that. And I think mainly funders are looking for like, how are you being creative and have your finger on the pulse, understanding that you have contingency plans, so to speak, if, one grant funder does sunset.
Yes, and I love the variety aspect that you're talking about and also the creative aspect because I think it's important for us to also elevate in this conversation during the reflection of financial sustainability for your nonprofit is ages. I do want to share the sentiment with a lot of people within the field, recognizing that as much as the economy is changing, so is the generational aspect of the people within society are changing. And what I'm seeing is also an abandoned mentality to those that are older. But those that are of older ages, when we talk about fundraising, when we talk about revenue mix, there's a sense of wisdom that's there, meaning what has worked and what hasn't worked, but also for them to have a sense of purpose in terms of what they still want to be involved in a community or their community at large. And older folks do tend to see dollars as an investment because they've lived a certain level of life. And so we want to be mindful as nonprofits when we're getting creative with revenue mix and also a variety of funding sources to be mindful of who makes up the age demographic of the community and what is tailored and fit to how they can still make sure that the nonprofits in their community are sustainable long term because the older population represents long term inherently.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think I would say bringing this back to the grant writing focus of our course too is, we're giving folks the tools to, be a little bit more efficient, be a little bit more persuasive with grant applications, looking for new opportunities. So, the work never stops. So you're always going to have to be looking for, new funding patterns, new funders. And I think just having that process means you can weather the storm in the event that a funder does, unfortunately, exit funding your organization.
Absolutely. So during this moment of reflection, really consider, does your organization have a revenue mix or is it time to remix, right? And it's time to shake it up a little bit just in terms of you really, again, as Anthony said, making sure you're efficient, making sure that you're keeping a hand on the pulse in terms of what percentage comes from your grants versus other sources that you have. And also, in the event that that emergency does happen where you have a cut in funding, not necessarily if you lose a grant or it may be a situation where the demand has increased in that particular area, so your current budget no longer just works for that area. What plans do you have in place, right? And how familiar are you with your ever-changing community to where you may have room to, again, remix that revenue or shake it up in terms of where you're getting your sources of funding from. So continue to reflect, and we look forward to talking to you a lot more about, again, this oversight aspect, budgets, narratives, etc., in your grant writing journey.